The present conflict in Ukraine poses serious challenges for the country's economy. How big are the losses and which sections of the economy have been hit the hardest? What are the chances of an improvement in the situation? OSW analyst Sławomir Matuszak explains.
According to official statistics, last year Ukraine's economy contracted by nearly a third. In fact, this should be recognized as a decent result because initial estimates indicated that GDP could fall by as much as 45%. At present, we can say that, in macroeconomic terms, there's a level of stability. The forecasts have even slightly improved. We're talking about an increase in symbolic terms of around 3%. Various forecasts for next year are a little more optimistic, but the most optimistic ones mention a little more than 5% growth, so we're not talking about a dynamic recovery. I don't think this situation will change until the intensive phase of hostilities end, and while practically the whole country is at risk of rocket and suicide drone bombardment, because every factory and all infrastructure is at risk, including foreign firms. Not long ago, the factory of the Polish firm Fakra was destroyed. It was in Lviv, near the Polish border, and it seemed to be very far from the front lines. This only shows that, in fact, the whole country is under threat. This, of course, has an impact on business activity, which in many industries is not doing particularly well.
The damage to the Ukrainian economy could have been even greater.
What Ukraine managed at the beginning seemed unrealistic. It was a change in how exports were shipped, meaning, on the one hand, the solidarity corridors, so an increase in the overland transportation of exports to the EU countries, and also the complete redirection of imports, in particular of fuel, which is so crucial for the functioning of the economy. And again, it was possible in a very short time span. In just a few weeks, Ukraine moved away from supplies from Russia and Belarus, because before the war most of its fuel had come from those two countries, towards the EU countries. At present, around 60% of fuel comes in from the EU, mainly by rail or trucks.
Ukraine would be unable to function today without financial help from the Western states. The money which Ukraine is able to raise from taxes, tariffs, etc., make up around half of the budget.
All that revenue is de facto used to finance the war, meaning for purchasing weapons, financing the armed forces, payments, etc. The remainder, meaning paying salaries and pensions, the whole budget, all the welfare obligations of the state, school maintenance, etc., is paid for using funds from the West, and at the moment it's about half of the budget. Nothing suggests it will be different next year. The draft budget for 2024 has just been submitted to Parliament. Spending is double the budget revenue. We'll see what the final budget looks like, but I suppose it won't be radically different, so the shortfall is over $40 billion, and Ukraine will really have to get those funds from the West. So far, mainly thanks to the European Union and the United States, the support has been stable, and Ukraine has received this aid. But now, as we know, there are problems in the US Congress. Next year there's an election. We don't know who will win. Ukraine is being mentioned more often. And also, the support pledged by the European Commission is not enough for Ukraine's requirements. Of course, there are other countries, Japan, Canada, the International Monetary Fund, other international organizations, and financial institutions. But everything suggests that the problems will grow. Of course, in the short term, Ukraine can get around this by doing what it did in the first months, by printing money. But we know that this is not the best solution in the long term.
At present, it's hard to see a quick end to the conflict. The enthusiasm of Western societies towards Ukraine is falling. This may also cause a serious problem.
If we assume that the war will end in a few months, this does not mean that Ukraine's financial needs will immediately decrease. Of course, the spending on the armed forces will be a little lower, but we don't believe that they will disband the whole army, that the spending will be the same as before the war. It's hard to imagine that the economic recovery will come as soon as peace is agreed. And that's on the assumption that it's a recognized peace, because that's also a problem. That it's not like the Minsk agreement, but is something that will truly bring an end to the war. At the moment, considering on the one hand the social mood in Ukraine and on the other hand Russia's position, which has the same significance, it's hard to imagine a solution.
The war inflicted losses on all parts of the economy, but some suffered more than others. Worst hit was the metallurgical industry. As with agriculture, it was exported via the Black Sea ports.
No i te porty zostały zablokowane z początku wojny i w przeciwieństwie do rolnictwa nie było żadnego korytarza metalowego.
And these ports were blocked at the start of the war. Unlike with agriculture, there was no metals corridor. There isn't really another way to transport it. Of course, there are exceptions. Some went to Poland by LHS, some all went to Slovakia, but it's not realistic to create an alternative to the transportation of such a heavy and cheap product, as the logistic costs are decisive. Apart from this problem with metallurgy, the second and third largest steel works in Ukraine have been destroyed, Azovstal and the Ilyich iron and steel works. Other works were partially destroyed, but we don't have the details. Metallurgy is functioning at 20% of pre-war levels, or perhaps a little more, and precisely in contrast to agriculture, until the Black Sea ports are unblocked, we shouldn't expect any improvement. Agriculture also suffered, partially due to the occupation, especially due to the problems in the first months with exports. But firstly, finding alternative supply routes helped. We don't have the official data yet this year, but it seems production will be a few % higher than last year. This is mainly down to good weather. In the first half of this year, agriculture made up 60% of Ukraine's entire exports. So this is another indication of how important it is for the country.
At present, it's difficult to make accurate forecasts about the Ukrainian economy.
Dopóki nie będzie
Until there is a lasting peace, with the stress on the word lasting, then the economy will remain as it is now, meaning entirely dependent on external financing. While the attacks in the country are ongoing, we can't expect large-scale investment from Western countries or any others because of the risk. However, if we assume the war ends in a lasting peace and Ukraine enters EU accession negotiations, then within 10 to 20 years we can imagine the country's economy developing dynamically. But there are a lot of challenges here, ones which Ukraine faced even before the war. How to introduce the rule of law, how to reform the judiciary, and generally fighting all corruption. And there is another problem, which is not strictly an economic one, but one which will only grow in future years: the demographic catastrophe in Ukraine. Of course, according to surveys of refugees, we can see that the clear majority intend to return to Ukraine. But experience from other conflicts shows that that's not the case. Added to that is the fact that, without a special permit, men cannot legally leave Ukraine. We can imagine that when the war ends, even if half the refugees return, it could turn out that half of Ukrainian men leave for the West, for example for better salaries. Plus the fact that even before the war, Ukraine had a rapidly aging population. The birth rate was half that of the mortality rate, so the country was slowly dying off. And so over the next few years, Ukraine faces a lot of very serious challenges, even in the optimistic scenario of the war ending quickly, with victory going to Ukraine.
Thank you for watching. Make sure to subscribe to our channel to keep up to date with all our content on the politics of Eastern Europe and Asia.